In each of us, two natures are at war, the good and the evil. All our lives, the fight goes on between them, and one of them must conquer. But in our own hands lies the power to choose. What we want most to be, we are. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote that in his classic novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But it could have just as easily been said by Professor Wyndham Lathem. He was a renowned microbiologist and a professor at Northwestern University. But his fantasies were bizarre and bloody. And then one summer night, he gave in to his evil nature and he let Mr. Hyde out of his cage. Welcome to True Crime Recaps. I'm Amy. Around 5 a.m. on July 27th, 2017, residents on the 10th floor of the pricey Grand Plaza apartments were awakened by a horrific noise. They sat up in bed and strained to listen. Was that a scream? Surely not. It must have been a dream. And slowly, one by one, they went back to sleep, safe in their assumption that nothing sinister could happen in their building, not in Chicago's expensive River North neighborhood. In another apartment, in a not as expensive building on the other side of Chicago, Carl Mash was anxiously texting his roommate, 26-year-old Trenton Cornell Duranlo. He was a funny, charming hairdresser from Michigan who had moved to the city in early spring of 2016. The following year, he started seeing an older, wealthy scientist, a man named Wyndham Lathem. On July 26, Trent borrowed Carl's bus pass to go to Wyndham's River North condo. Promised he'd be back with it in the morning. But when the AM hours came and went with no sign of him, he got worried enough to text Wyndham. But he wasn't responding either. Around 8:30 that night, almost 15 hours after screams rang out on the 10th floor, an anonymous caller contacted the front desk to let them know that a crime may have been committed in Wyndham Lathem's condo. With that message delivered, the caller hung up without leaving a name. When no one answered their knock, the doorman used the master key to let the police inside. Trent's butchered body lay against the half-open bedroom door. A bloody 6-inch blade from a drywall saw was on the kitchen counter. Its handle was in the garbage can under the sink, and the condo's owner was nowhere to be found. Wyndham Lathem was a 47-year-old renowned microbiologist whose work on the Black Death plague made him a nationally known expert in his field. He'd been an associate professor at Northwestern's Chicago campus since 2007, mostly doing research in the lab, but sometimes he was in the classroom teaching medical and grad students. He was known as an extremely intelligent scientist who fiercely guarded his personal life. Now, 3 days before the murder, 56-year-old Andrew Warren landed in Chicago. He'd left his sister and her husband behind in the United Kingdom without a word. They later reported him missing. Unbeknownst to them, he was taking his first trip to the United States, an all-expenses paid excursion funded by a man he'd met online, Wyndham Lathem. And months earlier, the two of them had bonded over their shared dark fantasies in a forum devoted to that kind of thing. And as it turned out, they had a lot in common. Like Wyndham, Andrew made his living in higher academia. He worked at Oxford University's payroll department, and he'd been struggling with debilitating depression brought on by family trauma and a police investigation over child pornography, although in the end, he wasn't charged. By the time he connected with Wyndham, he was almost broke and he wanted to die. The two of them talked about traveling to Australia together to be murdered. A man they'd met in the same forum said he'd shoot and kill them if they made the trip. They worked it all out, the three of them, but when it came down to it, the would-be shooter decided to take a cruise instead. And that's when Wyndham came up with the plan. It started as a murder-suicide. Wyndham was going to stab him while Andrew shot him. He bought him a ticket to the States, rented him a hotel room across from his condo, and together they made plans to buy a gun. With meth flowing through their veins to steel their resolve, they headed southwest to St. Louis, but they had to turn around empty-handed when they couldn't show proof of residency. On the 4.5-hour drive back to Chicago, Wyndham had an idea. They would murder his young, trusting boyfriend, Trent, instead. The two of them had met on Grindr a few months earlier. According to the Chicago Tribune, the hookup led to a friends with benefits situation, which evolved into a relationship. Knife play was one of the fetishes they shared. Wyndham explained it like this. It's a little bit scary. It requires trust, and there's a range of sexual experiences that you can get by the feel of the knife on the body. It's definitely not for everybody, which is part of why Wyndham was so attracted to Trent. He'd been on another Grindr date a year or so before he met Trent, and when he asked if he could pretend to stab this date while they had sex, the date said, hell no. According to that man, Wyndham went from Fred Flintstone to Freddy Krueger in about 30 seconds. He said he had to pull his gun to get him out the door. On July 26, 2017, Mr. Hyde came out again. Wyndham lured Trent over to his apartment with the promise of wild sex. At the same time, he was texting Andrew, letting him know the plan was going down that night. By 5:30 a.m. on July 27th, Trent had been stabbed 78 times and left almost decapitated. His killers decided to head west, but before they fled the city, they did something bizarre. They made a stop at the Howard Brown Health Center. It's an LGBT health and social services provider in Chicago. And Wyndham made a $6,000 cash donation in Trent's name. And then they traveled a little further, and he donated $1,000 in Trent's name to a library in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. While he was there, he used the phone to make that anonymous call to the River North building, the call that brought the police to his door and launched a massive cross-country manhunt. For 9 days, they evaded the police, but he couldn't shake his temptation to confess. In a video message to his family and friends, he said, I killed him. I did do it. It wasn't an accident, but it was a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life, and I regret it with every fiber of my being. In his message, he admitted he wasn't the person they thought he was. He described the way Trenton had trusted him completely and felt safe with him, but he took that all away when he killed him. He said he'd probably be dead soon too, and he explained what he wanted done with his remains. His money, he said, should go to charity in Trent's name. On August 4th, the law caught up to them in California. Now that they were in custody with nothing to lose, the truth came flooding out. Or, I should say, each man's separate version of the truth. Andrew pleaded guilty, and he claimed he snuck into the apartment around 4:30 a.m. and followed Wyndham into the bathroom so they could talk without waking Trent. He says he was handed a cell phone and told to record the murder. The men took off all their clothes to avoid bloodstains, but at first he said he couldn't do it. Instead, he watched Wyndham stab the sleeping 26-year-old over and over. His last words were, "Why are you doing this, Wyndham?" When Trent fought back, he hit him over the head with a lamp, got a knife from the kitchen, and joined the attack. He also had one more piece of chilling information to share. There was another intended victim, but they fled before that person got to the apartment. Wyndham pleaded not guilty, and he told the opposite story. He claimed the night started out as a meth-fueled threesome, complete with a safe word, mosquito. He admitted bringing the drywall saw into the bedroom, but he said it was just to play with. He denied he wanted to use it to carry out his sick snuff fantasy. He claimed it was just meant to be consensual until Andrew went off the rails and used it to kill Trent while he cowered in the bathroom, unwilling to join in, but unable to stop him. When it was finished, they showered, cleaned the apartment, and left his body laying there. Wyndham's trial started in the fall of 2021. The proceedings lasted 2 weeks. At the end, it took a jury only 2 hours to decide Andrew's side of things was probably the truth, and Wyndham was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 53 years in prison. Andrew got 45. And that is your recap. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. If you like getting all the crime in half the time, it would mean so much to us if you take a second to subscribe and give this a like. We're here every week with new stories. Until next time, keep your evil nature in check and take care.